Okay, friends, this is a follow-up video to the one of the recent videos that I've done about Cenk Uygur being interviewed by Piers Morgan. I noticed some of the comments and many of you in the video told me you either agree, and many more were saying they don't agree with the stake and what Cenk Uygur was talking about. So I wanted to make a follow-up video to much more of an expert in the discussion. That will be
And
Colonel,
Russians.
there it is, Colonel Macgregor. I'm gonna let this video play out. I'm not gonna say anything else. I wanted to say this. There's a lot of stuff that's going on with Hamas and Israel that we now know, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. Our perspective is changing consistently because we're learning and growing. I remember how my perspective has changed when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. I mean, the first 2 weeks of the war, Ukraine and Russia, my perspective was Russians are bad, Ukrainians are good. We should support Ukrainians no matter what, right? And I began to do some more research and find out, wait, there was some other stuff going on that we didn't know about when it comes to Ukraine. There was a lot of corruption, and there was stuff that Biden was involved with, and there were Nazis in Ukraine and all this different stuff that the media never even spoken about. So I began to realize, wait, should we be supporting Ukraine in a way that we are if they have been doing these things? So I say that to say this, not to say we don't regard human life, we don't think war is wrong and evil. That's not the point. My point is we have to keep an open mind about a lot of this stuff we're discussing, right? A lot of what you may think you know now, you might discover later on you were wrong. There's a lot of stuff we might think about Israel now, and a lot of things we might think about Hamas, which I don't think there's anything positive I can say about Hamas, to be honest with you. But the Palestinian people, Israel, if I may pen those two, there's a lot of things you might think now, later on, will change. So I think this video here goes in depth. Okay, it goes in depth about what is going on, what we now know and what we don't know, and the potential of what could happen and how this could lead us into a World War III. The reason I love this man, Conor McGregor, one of the reasons I love him, I've listened to a video of him talking about Ukraine and Russia. I'll tell you what, over 90% of what this man said was correct. The media actually is confirming what he's been saying. He's been saying this is what's going on. They are not losing. Here are the numbers, what's happening to the armed forces that we are sending there, the amount of money that is being spent, how it is being used and abused. There's a lot. I mean, he gives you like the backdrop of the story. It's an anti-war. He's a loud voice, okay? And the man speaks with a whole lot of wisdom based on experience and skills and everything else. I don't know much more about him, but when you listen to him talk and you compare the numbers, you're like, yo, he is on point. So his perspective here on this issue is significant. I'm gonna let that video play out. I'm gonna stop talking. It's a 37 minutes video. Okay, you need to watch the video from start to finish so you can understand why my perspective has changed to a degree. Okay, you can understand why, even though I'm not a big fan of this man, but you can give credit where credit is due. Some things he said were good, not all things. Some things he was completely off-key about some of the things he said. But there were many things he said that were 100% correct, okay? We can actually respect that. You don't have to like him and watch his channel. That's beside the point. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. Thank you so much. Check out the video, link in the description below as well. Share your thought and perspective with me at the end, okay? I'm not gonna say much when it comes to this. We're gonna let it play out, and then we'll have the discussion in a comment box. All right, have a good one. Bye.
Hey, gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, and I need not tell you that the world is changing right before our very eyes. And there's really no way of truly understanding what's happening and what could happen between Israel and Hamas without understanding this colossal geopolitical change. But what if one side in this conflict actually doesn't recognize how dramatically the world is changing. What could potentially happen in this massive failure to recognize this new rising geopolitical reality? Well, it's our honor to have with us once again expert military and geopolitical analyst Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Colonel Macgregor, of course, is all over social media, but most particularly, you'll see him as a frequent guest of Tucker Carlson's. And he's here to help us make some sense of what's actually turning into a very complicated and potentially very cataclysmic clash that's already engulfing much of the world. So, Colonel, welcome back. It's an honor, as always, to have you.
Well, thank you very much.
So let's set the stage here. I know we were all shocked by what happened on October 7th. There's no question on that. And of course, there's no question that a sovereign nation like Israel has a right to defend itself. But I think what more and more people are getting very concerned about is that this righteous rage, as it were, is being used as a green light for Israeli forces to unleash hell against Hamas, with seemingly no consideration either by the Israelis or by the political class in DC of the indescribably disastrous consequences that can result from such unrestrained green lighting. Is that, in your estimation, an accurate frame for understanding big picture what's unfolding in front of us?
Oh, yes. I think that's a good way to begin the discussion. And we could spend hours describing the problems in the region, particularly in Gaza and Israel, that led to these tragic events of 7 October. That's almost unimportant compared with what you're discussing. And that are the implications for what's happening right now. The largest problem is that we in the West, and I say probably more accurate to say the United States, and to a lesser extent Israel, do not understand how profoundly different the region is today from what it was in 1973. I was in Israel when they celebrated the 40th anniversary of the 1973 war. And things were really quite different then. You had a very low level of literacy in places like Egypt. You had very confused leaderships in both Syria and Egypt. There was no sense of unity whatsoever in the Muslim world. Many of the states that today are really major powers were at the time simply developing, pulling themselves out of the past and into the present. So that's part of our problem. The second part is that we in Washington, in particular, seem to regard ourselves as permanently stuck in the aftermath of 1991. I hear people all the time, oh, well, look what we did in Desert Storm. Well, they don't really understand what happened, but we'll set that aside. But more important, they don't understand that our forces, the structure of our forces, everything has deteriorated since 1991. And, people ask, well, what happened to all of that money? It's a little late to ask, but I think that those questions should have come up earlier. But people rushed to spend because that was a way to also line their pockets. If you're sitting on the Hill, you spend, and the spending you're told is going to produce military power, and say, oh, it's great. Money in equals military power coming out. Doesn't work that way. So there was very little accountability, or what I would call informed supervision or oversight. So an awful lot of that was wasted. And in the meantime, the forces have shrunk in size. And certainly the last 2.5 years of this administration have been devastating for the armed forces, particularly the Army and the Marines. Huge problems inside those forces, divisive issues, divisive policies. So we are not today remotely as we were in 1991. We are a great power, to be sure. We may be the leading great power, but we are not the only great power. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that everyone seems to miss the point that we've exhausted our war stocks. We have very little to fall back on because we've been feeding everything into the fire in Ukraine, all to naught. That has produced nothing for us and nothing for the American people, and I would add nothing for the Ukrainian people. And Russia, which began with a very small force that was never designed to do more than just protect Russia, now sits on top of one of the largest and most capable forces in the world. And that has an impact on our thinking now, or it should, as we go forward. Those are the big issues for Washington, but we really, really, really don't understand the gravity of Israel's actions. No one disagrees with or disputes Israel's views and feelings as a result of what happened on the 7th of October. That goes without question. And there are lots of examples in history where things like this have happened and produced outrage that resulted in revenge attacks.
Mhm.
We certainly felt that way after Pearl Harbor, and our interaction with the Japanese during World War II was horrendous.
Mhm.
There's a
Mhm.
reason we didn't take very many prisoners, and it wasn't always because no one would give up. I mean, let's be
Right.
frank, it was a
Right.
terrible, terrible war. But those things could always still happen to us today. We have to guard against it. But right now, we have a situation where the Israelis are emoting, we are emoting. And we have this relationship that exists between every great power and every small power. When you ally yourself or you commit yourself to a smaller power, you run the risk that the smaller power will try to leverage you
Mhm.
war against people that, under normal circumstances, you would prefer not to fight.
Right.
That's not, do we like them or not like them? But in most cases, war is not a good idea. I know that's a revolutionary statement. In today's America, we become so accustomed to using the word war and pretending that war is something that happens on somebody else's soil.
Right.
Well, this is a war that will come and visit us as well. And that's why we need to think carefully about it. So I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll try to work through the strategic consequences of various actions.
It's just as you're speaking, I listened to Alexander McCurry over at the Duran, who said he had just had a great observation. Neocons only seem to know how to escalate. More money, more weapons, more threats, more countries to threaten. There just appears to be no sense of any semblance of de-escalation among the particularly the neocons in DC or in Brussels for that matter. But I think when I'm hearing you saying what makes this particularly alarming is that propensity towards escalation is spread into Tel Aviv now, with an official of the Netanyahu government promising to wipe Iran off the face of the earth if Hezbollah in Lebanon gets involved. It seems that the two major parties involved here, in terms of the West versus the rest, U.S. and Israel, they're only thinking in escalating terms, and that doesn't end well, does it?
Well, right now, Mr. Netanyahu thinks that he has a unique opportunity to leverage American military power in a regional fight to destroy all of Israel's enemies. This is no longer just about Israel versus Hamas.
Hmm.
The Gaza problem has been there for a long time. This gave him the opportunity to appeal to the Israeli nation and say, it's time for us to erase Gaza.
Hmm.
And so he is planning to go into Gaza and not simply remove the population. He will expel whatever he can, but anything that is not expelled will be killed. So this is a scorched earth operation. And people have to understand, especially in this urban environment in Gaza City, when you send soldiers in there, Israeli, American, British, whatever they are, your predisposition is to shoot first and ask questions later. You're not going to fiddle around with somebody who sticks his head up and ask whether or not he's part of Hamas or she's part of Hamas. You're simply going to fire. So this is the worst kind of situation you can imagine. And he's been very vocal about his determination to essentially wage this scorched earth policy against Gaza. This has, to put it mildly,
Hmm.
enraged the entire Muslim world.
One
So
billion. Yeah.
he's no longer looking at containing the conflict to Gaza. In fact, I think he's quite prepared to expand it, thinking that with our assistance, we can take on anybody who challenges him and win. I think
Hmm.
that's a big mistake because I don't think we can do that.
That's the 1991 thinking.
Well, yeah, but in 1991, go back and look at strategically, if we did anything right, we carefully isolated Iraq.
Right. Right.
Iraq had
Yeah.
no friends. No one was going to
Right.
intervene on behalf of Iraq. Hamas is a reprehensible organization. True. But when you start to be seen as killing Arabs, Muslims, simply because they happen to be there, no matter what your rationale for doing it happens to be, That changes everything. And the people in Gaza have a lot of potential support across the entire region and potentially beyond. Now, let's stop and think. Years ago, no one ever mentioned Turkey. In fact, even now in the United States, very few people bring it up, which is a mistake,
Right.
because what we've seen over the last 20 years in Turkey is a gradual retrenchment of what I would call Ottoman culture and
Hmm.
Ottoman Turkish nationalism. The Turkey of Ataturk,
Yeah. The
Mustafa
secular
Kemal,
experiment. Yeah.
is gone.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, it's vanished. They still pay tribute to him and they see him as a hero, but let's face it, this Turkey has moved in directions that are absolutely counterproductive from the standpoint of Mustafa Kemal. He wanted to, if anything, not only modernize Turkey, but he wanted to Europeanize it. He
Right.
wanted to thoroughly cleanse it of any form of religious nationalism and separate church from state.
Yeah.
Well,
Bring in a Latin-based alphabet and everything. Yeah. Yeah.
but that's all being reversed. And
Yeah.
we have to understand that the Turks, over many, many years, have built an extraordinarily sophisticated and capable military establishment. And unlike everybody else in the region, they have a long martial history. The Turks are excellent soldiers, first class soldiers. They have a good officer corps. And this officer corps, as opposed to what existed 10 years ago or 20 years ago, is fiercely loyal to Erdogan and his vision. And then finally, Turkey has always had close relations with Pakistan. And
Mhm.
that goes back many, many years for different kinds of reasons. But the point that Pakistan has always made it clear to the Turks that if they should need a nuclear weapon,
Wow.
Pakistan will provide it. And
Mm.
that has now been repeated publicly in the Pakistani parliament. So you're not dealing with Turkey of 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all of these states have changed. You have a
Right.
much more literate, much more informed population. Social media reaches everyone.
Yep.
And someone was asking me about this riot at the airport in Dagestan, which is a province of Russia. And of
Russia.
course, the people that live in Dagestan are Turks. We sometimes
Mm.
refer to them as Turkic. What Americans don't understand, most people in the West don't understand, is that from the borders of Mongolia and Kazakhstan in the east, all the way to the Mediterranean, with very few exceptions, the only one I can think of is Tajikistan, they all speak effectively the same language as Mr. Erdogan.
Mhm. Yeah.
The Tatars who live in Crimea can read and listen to Erdogan's talks.
Right.
They can tune him in. They can tune
Right.
him in all over Central Asia. They are hearing what he's saying,
Right.
and they are furious. Now, as it turned out, there were no Israelis on that plane.
Yeah.
In fact, when they got there, they discovered one Uzbek who got off, who I'm sure was not very happy about it. By the
Yeah.
way,
Right.
Uzbeks speak the same language for all intents and
Right.
purposes. And
Right.
all of these people were part of the former, Turkic Mongolian hordes. I mean, when Genghis Khan led his armies into action, 50% of his army was usually Turkish or Turkic.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we don't understand that. And
Right.
what we witnessed was not some sudden outburst of anti Semitism. You can go
Right.
across Central Asia and find Jews, and the Jews there are not harmed by anyone. It was all focused on Israel and what they're hearing through the media from people like Erdogan. And that's hugely important. And Erdogan is not just a blowhard. I've heard people say,
Right.
oh, he couldn't be serious. Are you out of your mind?
Right.
It is deadly serious. And what
Right.
he's been doing by moving 100 Turkish naval vessels in a massive display of Turkish naval power through the Bosporus is not an accident. The Turks can field a large navy, large air forces. They have a base on Cyprus. They can reach everything in the region with their weapon systems. And for the first time, the Israelis have done something that no one's been able to do in 1,000 years. They've united Shia and Sunni
Yeah.
against them.
Yeah. I was just going to bring up. We've got the Arab Sunni side of the equation there, but what about the Persian Shiite side of the equation with threatening Hezbollah and overtly threatening Iran? They've just they've united 80%, 20% together of the Islamic world. It's stunning.
And then the other point about Iran is everybody looks at Iran, well, that's a backward place and people there don't know anything. You're talking about they have an elite class of very bright people that have come together, just as they have in Russia, by the way, under
Yeah.
Putin, to produce some remarkable technological achievements,
Yeah.
particularly in theater ballistic missiles and also in these unmanned systems that we've seen operate in Russia. So the point is that you're dealing with two very powerful states, populations 80 to 90 million. Think about the fact that 60% or more of the population is under the age of 30. So
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
talking
Wow.
about fielding enormous armies. And some
Wow.
people say, well, armies don't make any difference. You can destroy them all. Well, I've got news for you. If you
Yeah.
think armies don't make any difference, you don't understand warfare
Right.
because they can be moved in various ways very quickly. And they have a lot of good equipment, especially from the Turkish side, that can travel the distance between the Turkish border and the Golan Heights very quickly. You know, you can drive from the Turkish border down to the Golan Heights in perhaps 12 hours.
Wow.
And if you're an Israeli, one of the things that you worry about is exactly that, because if the enemy closes with you on your borders, how can you use a nuclear weapon unless you plan to commit suicide?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And Hezbollah, of course, is sitting right there on the border with Israel. And the interesting thing is that Hezbollah took a lot of casualties defeating the Sunni Islamists in Syria,
Hmm.
working with not only Iran, but also Mr. Assad and his government and
Hmm.
the Russians.
Hmm.
And the Hezbollah is much larger, much more sophisticated, much better armed than Hamas. And if you consider the damage that Hamas has inflicted so far, it's a fraction of what Hezbollah could do.
Right.
My great
Right.
concern is that at some point Hezbollah is going to launch. And they're going to launch because they're going to discover that what the Israelis are doing right now, instead of staging a massive invasion all at once, they are moving incrementally and deliberately. That's so
Hmm.
that they minimize their own casualties, which makes a lot
Right.
of sense. But it also tends to mislead the viewing audience to think, oh, well, they're not really going in, are they? Oh,
Yeah.
yes, they will go in.
Yeah.
I know the IDF, when they get a mission and are told to do it, they will do it to the best of their ability. Now, are they all excited about it? As I pointed out, this urban warfare is really terrible,
Yeah. Like
and it
Fallujah.
inevitably exacts a high price from its participants. So, no, I don't think they are, and they will use a lot of firepower to spare their soldiers' lives as much as
Right.
possible. But in the meantime, people are figuring it out, and I think Hezbollah will attack. We are supposed, according to public statements, to intervene and attack Hezbollah to take the burden off the Israeli Air Force so that it can continue to function on Gaza. I would fully expect an open rebellion or revolt on the West Bank in Palestine by the Palestinian Arabs who are there. That hasn't happened yet, but I would expect it. And then I would expect enormous pressure in Egypt on the government and say, what are we doing to help these people in Gaza? Why don't we intervene to stop the mass murder of the Arabs in Gaza? And I think that pressure will result in Egypt's intervention into the conflict.
Mm.
At that point, I think you're going to have Mr. Erdogan who will show up and tell General Sisi, I'm here. Let me know what you need. I'll do everything I possibly can. I would expect Iran to do something similar. Syria, of course, is effectively already in the fight. We have
Right.
1,000 soldiers sitting up in the eastern corner of Syria, which Donald Trump
Yeah.
rightly wanted to get out, and he
And
was
they didn't listen to him, right?
oh,
They rebelled. Yeah.
no, they listened, they disobeyed. There's
Oh, disobeyed. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
and he wanted to get us out of Iraq as well. All of our troops in Iraq and in Syria are going to be under a very severe threat because, again, the Turks and the Iranians are far more powerful than any of their Arab neighbors. They can
Right.
actually execute complex operations with missiles and ground forces and so forth. Then there's the problem of us sitting at sea. Now, I'm sure that we will sit a long ways from Israel. That would be the intelligent thing to do to prevent our vessels from being easily attacked. But that's also very difficult on pilots trying to deliver ordnance against targets in southern Lebanon, especially if they're flying from somewhere west of Greece, almost to
Hmm.
Sicily.
Hmm.
Now the pilot delivers his ordnance, he's got to refuel, he may have to land in Israel. We don't know what the conditions in Israel will be in terms of rockets and missiles falling. In the meantime, however good the claims may be about the performance of Iron Dome, the numbers of projectiles, the numbers of things falling on the Israelis is simply too great to stop. In other words, you're going to break through. Any air defense system can be overwhelmed if you fire enough missiles and so forth at it, and then eventually destroyed. We've seen that in Ukraine. We've seen it in the Donbass. This is a fact of life and war. And then there's the issue of how much more can we ship when they need it. We've already diverted 155 millimeter ammunition from Ukraine to Israel, which of course makes infinite sense. But then again, Ukraine is in ruins. We've
Yeah.
made a terrible mess of that.
Yeah.
And my great fear, and what I wrote about in the American Conservative when I wrote this op-ed saying avoiding Armageddon, is at the end of this process, I don't want Israel to look like Ukraine, destroyed.
Right. Right.
And I'm afraid that no one will intervene to stop any of this. And the way you stop it is very straightforward. Most American presidents, when they thought the Israelis were going too far that might precipitate a larger problem, have intervened and said, stop, that's enough, pull back. Most recently, during the 73 war, we said, that's enough. If you've crossed the Suez Canal, get back on the other side. And they did. And we got a good agreement ultimately, and have had good relations between Israel and Egypt all these years. In fact, we know the Egyptians did warn the Israelis about what eventually happened in Gaza. So, when is someone going to stand up and say, look, we love Israel, but unconditional support for an action in Gaza that could precipitate a regional war that will not only drag us in, but will probably destroy Israel, doesn't make a lot of sense to us.
And the irony is, isn't this exactly what Hamas wants? Don't they want to be at the heart, at the very center of the worldwide Islamic unification? And doesn't that mean then that Israel and the United States, at this point in their reactions, are giving Hamas exactly what they always wanted?
Well, I can't provide you with tangible, concrete proof of strategic genius in Hamas. That may be on somebody's minds. I think they may have underestimated the impact of their operation as well. I don't think we can say that. I don't. It could work out that way. I think, Steve, let's be frank. I mean, it certainly looks bad.
Yeah.
It certainly looks like the Israelis are about to jump into a giant bear trap. There's no question about it. But the good news is that if we were able to intervene now and say, look, you've got to stop, no more, hold back. If you don't hold back, we will withdraw our forces. You tell that to the Israelis, they'll stop. Because right now they are confident that they have unconditional support to do whatever they want to do. And we don't do that.
No.
I mean, that was the great failure in 1914 with the German emperor. He said, well, if that's what the Austrians want to do, we're bound to support them. Let them do it. Insane.
You're right.
He should have said, outrageous. We're not going to war with Russia and France over Serbia. Are you crazy? And of course, the Russians should never have intervened and should have told the Serbs, behave, stop being idiots. I'm not taking Russia into war over Serbia. Nobody did it. And we had the First World War. We don't want to go through that. And then finally, there's this point. We've got to keep this in mind. Iran has supported Russia throughout this entire process with Ukraine. Russia is not going to abandon Iran.
Right.
If we decide to attack it with the goal of destroying Iran, which is what I hear in Washington all the time, we will ultimately end up confronting Russia. And the Russians are obviously going to do business with the Turks. They're not normal friends or allies, but under the circumstances, why should they hold back? And this is one of the things I've said the Israelis made a big mistake when they decided to suddenly turn and support this corrupt criminal regime in Kiev. They stuck with Moscow. Moscow has been very good to the Israelis. Has always accommodated them, gone out of his way to do so, told the Iranians if they come into Syria, they're targets, and he's not going to stop it. He turned off the air defense systems for us when we insisted that we wanted to launch cruise missiles, even though they told us it was stupid and it made no sense, and they were right. But they said, fine, if that's what you want to do, we'll accommodate you. Why would you destroy that relationship with a major power? But Mr. Netanyahu and his government did that. It's now coming back to haunt them. The Russians aren't going to go out of their way for the Israelis. So then finally, who else is left? Well, you have India and China. And the Indians right now, they're quite happy to do business with the Israelis, and so are the Chinese. But under the circumstances, not right now, and maybe not again as a result of this terrible war. And the Chinese have already said that since we talk constantly about destroying China, we go into this nonsense about war with China, although China, China, China. So the Chinese are saying, well, we're going to back these Russians because ostensibly we're next on the menu. In other words, everything we've done, and I'm afraid the Israelis right now, has been strategically suicidal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It
for
just
us,
turned the entire world against us. Yep.
yeah, and then at the same time, you've got the problem in France and Germany and Scandinavia who've taken in all these Muslims, which was a terrible
Right.
mistake from the Middle East and Africa. You can't assimilate these people, and they're very open about it. They've come here to
Right.
reproduce and drive you out and take
Right.
your country. So, what an ugly set of circumstances. I can't imagine anything worse. I guess if you give me some time, I might come up with something.
Yeah. No,
And now,
no, let's not.
think about
We
it.
can't handle it.
And then we're looking at this in the United States, and people are saying to me, "Where did all these Muslims come from?" Well,
Yeah.
haven't you paid any attention to immigration? The answer is no.
Exactly.
Everybody's asleep. Nobody cares.
Exactly.
I mean,
When you have
go out on the 5th of May and see the celebrations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have open borders, you
Yeah,
inevitably invite the world's conflicts. Yep. Yeah.
exactly. And so we're sitting on our own kind of powder keg as well. And this, sacrificing Israel on the altar of stupidity doesn't make sense.
No, we've already done that with
That's what we're
Ukraine.
doing. And I
Yeah.
think the Israelis are co-conspirators. They're so full of anger and hate, and they think they've got so much control over us that we'll do whatever we're told.
Right.
And right now, I
Right.
guess we have no leadership. But this
What
isn't going to last.
what's Europe doing in all of this? I mean, they were so loud and on the forefront of the disastrous campaign in Ukraine, but they seem to be totally missing in action here with the Israeli Hamas conflict.
Well, I would tell you that in Europe, the governments there are going to be replaced. It's already
Yeah.
begun.
It's already started. Yeah.
And they're all swinging hard to the right.
Yep. Far
And
right.
hard
So
to the right in Europe means no war with Russia. Thank you very
right.
much.
Right.
And
Right.
everybody knows that Putin is not marching further west. He has no
Right.
appetite.
Right.
He's quite happy with what he's got. He's sitting in the Russian areas where people
Yeah.
speak Russian or Russian. I'm sure he's going to move to take Kharkov and probably Odessa either
Odessa. Yeah.
soon or during the winter. They're historically Russian cities.
Right.
As for the rest of it, he doesn't want to govern Ukrainians.
He
But
doesn't want to govern Poles. That's for sure.
absolutely not. That's a losing proposition. But he's not going to sit there and watch us in Washington turn Western Ukraine into this platform for attack against Russia. That's
Right.
off. So, I mean, if you push him hard enough, yes, he'll cross the river. He'll do it, but that's not what he wants. He'd rather have a settlement that neutralizes the rest of Ukraine and be
Yeah.
done with this and go back to doing business
Right.
with everybody in Eastern Europe and Central Europe.
Right.
Europeans are now looking at the problem they have in their country and they're saying, we made terrible mistakes. Now, for the first time, we hear Scholz in Germany. It's too late for him. He's scheduled for elimination.
Yeah,
But he's
gone.
now saying, well, we're going to deport these people. Yeah, well,
Yeah. Right.
good luck with that. There are 5 or 6 million of them.
As
Not
the alternative for Deutsche, the AfD just is fast becoming the most popular party in Germany right
yeah,
now. Yeah.
and all they've ever said, by the way, this is not some radical bunch at all. All
No.
they've ever said is, look, we don't want to go to this war with Russia. We don't
Right.
think it makes any sense. And why are we destroying our societies by inviting all these foreigners in?
Exactly.
That's their basic message.
Right. That's far right today, Colonel.
Yeah. Well, anything that you say that opposes whatever the
Exactly. It's racist. It's bigoted. It's
and
far
of
right.
course, here we have no two-party system. You have a uniparty.
Uniparty.
And the
Yeah.
uniparty wants all of these things. And you have a little group of Republicans over on the side that say well, I'm in the Freedom Caucus, although it doesn't mean much because some of those people are nuts, frankly.
Right.
I've heard them stand up, and we have to join the war for Israel against the world.
Yeah.
No, we don't. We
No.
need to get the Israelis to back off and work out a solution that keeps Israel alive.
Right.
That's
Right.
number one, not let's sacrifice everything in a war we don't want to fight. And then secondly, you've got a lot of people on the far, far left, and they really are violently anti-Israeli. And if
Right.
you want to go further and say anti-Semitic, yeah, probably applies to them. But you can cope with a lot of things, but you can't cope with this uniparty.
No.
Uniparty is impregnable and invincible right now, and they are running the show. And there are more. There's probably I don't know if our friend President Biden really knows what's going on, to be blunt.
Right.
But Joe Biden in the past was never enthusiastic about this sort of thing.
Right.
He wasn't. So I'm not sure he's doing much more, but reading what he's put in front of him.
Exactly. That's
Oh,
the cue cards that they give him. Yep. And
and
the
everybody else,
uh,
they're concerned about are campaign contributions, contributions to the
right.
past,
The
to the
donors. Yep.
various lobbies. And you know,
Right.
a lot of lobbies that are happy with these wars.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of money. A lot of money that ends up in their pockets. No
But
question.
Americans are not going to be very happy
No.
as the financial crisis that we've already started in gets worse.
Right.
These wars are going to force this implosion sooner than it might otherwise happen. I don't think the people in Washington are thinking it through. I think they assume that the Fed can continue to print money in perpetuity and no one will care. But they're
Yeah.
not looking at reality. No one wants to buy our treasury bonds.
Right. Right. Around the world. That's right. And
So,
if we don't have people buying our debt, we can't spend the way we've been spending.
well, who's going to pay for all of this?
Right. Right.
Well, we know
Exactly.
the pension funds
Yeah.
that
They're all
own
there.
so
You go.
much of the
Oh, yeah.
marketplace.
Mm,
Americans, the
yeah.
people that think they're going to retire someday. Good luck with that plan under
Yeah.
the circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. So, speaking of failed regimes, as it were, just what's your opinion on the two-state solution? I mean, most of the world seems to want that. Biden reiterated the two-state solution. Go back to 1967 borders. Israel said that's an insult right now. I mean, I know they're speaking blustery at this point, but what's your? Is it dead? Is it still? Is it something that we're given the strength of 85% of the world's population, a more multipolar world, is a two-state solution inevitable? What's your view?
Right now, I can't say that anything is inevitable, although I'm worrying, as I told you to begin with, that Israel may not survive this event if it balloons and expands to the way it is right now. I think the two-state solution was always problematic for many, many years because the Israelis decided that if this is allowed to happen, we'll end up with the equivalent of an organized crime state on our borders that will be a constant threat to us. So to make the two-state solution work, there has to be some guarantee of some kind to the Israelis that whatever emerges is not dangerous to Israel in the way that the Russians refuse to tolerate anything in Western Ukraine that will be dangerous to them. That's the best I can say. But right now, if we don't intervene soon, Steve, I'm afraid that so much blood will be spilled, so much hatred will be engendered, that a reasonable solution at the end will become damn near impossible.
Right, for another 2 or 3 generations, absolutely,
That
given
is,
that
that
average
is
age.
assuming that the Israeli state survives.
Right,
You add Turkey and Iran into this, and then you have the Russians behind them, with potentially the Chinese as well.
right, right.
And you look at our fragile financial system, and I would argue our fragile armed forces.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Unless you think this administration is suddenly going to say, well, we're going to have to we're going to have to raise million-man armies and ship everybody to the Middle East and on and on. I don't think so.
Yeah, you'll lose the 30 and under vote overnight, literally, yeah,
I don't think
yeah,
it'll work.
yeah. Yeah, exactly, exactly, can't sustain that economy. Uh, Colonel, you're the CEO of our Country, Our Choice organization, amazing organization, gang. There's a link down below for you to click on to check it out. It seeks to create an American foreign policy, America First foreign policy that benefits the American people, as well as face a number of other challenges to our nation's security and prosperity. You have an amazing Twitter feed that people should definitely subscribe to, where you comment on all kinds of things. What can the average American just watching us today do to help prevent this tide of war from the uniparty?
Well, one of the things that you can try and do is let your congressman or senator, regardless of how much they disagree with you and how desperate they are to go to war in the region. And there are a lot of foolish people that think it was a great idea to go to war with Iran, and it's not. All you can do is register your opposition, phone calls, emails, whatever you can do. They do make a difference. Numbers of people make a difference. Our biggest problem, Steve, as you know, for many, many years, is that people have just ignored what's going on. It's
Right.
back to this comment, well, how did all of these Muslims get into the country?
Yeah, right. It's like, ah,
What planet are you on? Well, these people have been living on planet luxury.
Yeah.
And they become complacent, and all of a sudden they're watching the world they think existed vanish.
Yeah.
They're living
Yeah.
in a new world.
Yeah.
I was so tired of, well, we're the superpower. Are you out of your mind? Did you listen to the president of the United States?
Oh gosh. Yeah. That speech. Oh my.
He,
Yeah.
he sounds like we just had Pearl Harbor and
Yeah.
we're
Right.
mobilizing to fight. No,
Exactly.
we're not
Exactly.
there. This is a new world. That's not what we're dealing with.
That's not the world we're living in
Well,
anymore.
Americans have to become engaged. And, our country, our choice wants to unite Americans across party lines because we say, well, vote for Republicans, vote for Democrats, vote for nothing changes.
Nothing changes. Right.
And there are more things that unite us that we don't talk about than divide us. We're so focused on what divides us. So in our country, our choice, we focus on things that unite us with the goal of building a movement that can turn this ship whose steering is broken into a new direction on every level, at home as well as abroad. And we want peace abroad because without peace abroad, it's very hard to build prosperity here at home.
Exactly. Exactly. And you were part of an administration that did just that. 4 years of peace abroad and prosperity at home. And with Biden, all we get is wars abroad and depression at home. It's a disaster. Well, gang, make sure you click on that link below. Join Our Country, Our Choice. Make sure you link up and subscribe to Colonel Macgregor's Twitter feed. It's absolutely amazing, wonderful. And click on the link description below. Visit Our Country, Our Choice. Help Colonel Macgregor in his efforts to bring geopolitical sanity to Washington, D.C. Colonel Macgregor, again, thank you, sir. It's always an honor to have you here.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you, too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.